Welcome to Pushback. I'm Aaron Maté. Joining me is Brian Jackson. He is a multi-instrumentalist who, in the 1970s, put out a string of legendary albums with his musical partner, Gil Scott-Heron. He has a brand new album out on the label Jazz Is Dead. Brian Jackson, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Aaron.
I want to start with your run with Gil Scott-Heron in the 1970s. Just a very prolific era for you, and putting out albums that really had a huge influence on music. How do you look back on that time now?
Well, it's kind of still a bit amazing to me because none of us, we didn't do it for that. We didn't do it for fame and, recognition. We basically did it because it was something that there were issues that we felt needed to be addressed. And we were basically looking for the maximum impact, the way that we could bring these issues to the fore. And we had been looking at, we were both, in the TV generation. And one thing that we had noticed about television and about then what was the advertising mecca, Madison Avenue, was that they were using popular idioms, musical idioms, to sell their products. And, it occurred to us that maybe, and since they were our musical idioms to begin with, we thought maybe it might be a good idea if we would use those same type of formats to sell revolutionary thought.
All right. So then this leads me to one of your most popular songs, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised. This was basically a satire of the kind of commercialism you're speaking about, if I have it right. Talk to us about that song and how it came about.
Oh, you have it exactly right. As I told you, we were members of the television generation. And so we were constantly inundated by commercials, by ads for products that had dubious usefulness. And as we got older, we began to understand that that this was the purpose of ads and of Madison Avenue and of the engineering of consent, as I later learned that it was called, to make us believe that we were incomplete without these products that were constantly being invented just for us to buy them. And for no other reason than for us to give our money away. And this occurred to us at some point, the absurdity of it, and the negative effects that it actually had on our lives and on our consciousness. And, like a lot of things that were very serious to us, we made jokes about it. That as the old folks would say, laugh to keep from crying. So, The Revolution Will Not Be Televised was basically a series of vignettes from popular ads at the time. And it was inspired in part, by the last poets, when the revolution comes, with the whole idea was basically to make fun of all of these products and to, if we were able to do it in a way where the absurdity of these products and the absurdity of making people believe that they actually needed these things in order for their lives to be complete or for them to be happy or fulfilled in some way. It was our hope, that by conglomerating them, that putting them all together in this fashion, we might be able to point out the goal of Madison Avenue, the goal of these companies that try to kind of propagate these types of beliefs.
The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be televised. The revolution will not be brought to you by Xerox in 4 parts without commercial interruptions. The revolution will not show you pictures of Nixon blowing a bugle and leading a charge by John Mitchell, General Abrams, and Spyro Agnew to eat hog maws confiscated from a Harlem sanctuary. The revolution will not be televised.
And just as you mocked or satirized Madison Avenue with "The Revolution Will Not Be Televised." With your other music, is it fair to say that you were also challenging the engineering of consent when it comes to politics? You know, engineering consent for war, for policies of the government that were to the detriment of the people?
Absolutely. You know, we also, I mean, maybe not in jest, but we also touched on subjects like the nuclear power plants that were proliferating all around the world. When we wrote, when we recorded, We Almost Lost Detroit.
Sure enough, disasters on his mind. And what would Karen Silkwood say to you? I mean, if she was still alive, well, that when it comes to people's safety, money really wins out every time. Losing our minds. Well, how do you really get over so many lives? Say, well, how do you really get over so many lives? Say, well, how do you really get over losing your mind?
We talked about the immigration problem at the Mexican border. It was a song about that, you know, and there was the Watergate Blues, where this was definitely a mocking poem about the resignation of Richard Nixon and the Watergate scandal that led up to it. You know, so we had a lot of songs like that and you know, during our shows, Gil would always start out with a monologue about some of the things that were happening, and presented them in ways that, you know, might make you chuckle, but they were very serious and deadly serious in some cases.
Having seen him perform just on video and live once in the late 1990s, it struck me that Gil Scott-Heron was a pretty funny guy. He had a great sense of humor. Yeah,
I mean, I think he kind of secretly wanted to be kind of like Richard Pryor, but he got pretty close, to be honest, sometimes.
And it was Pryor who got you guys on Saturday Night Live, right?
Well, we were big fans of his. We were huge fans of his. We had no idea that he knew anything about us, but yeah, you know, it was a prerequisite, in fact, for him appearing, because they kind of pushed back against his choice, and you know, he basically had to come down to telling them, look, everybody who does a guest appearance on this show gets to choose their musical artist, and I expect to be treated no differently. And, you know, with that, they understood that if he wasn't allowed to choose his musical artist, that he wouldn't do it.
His latest album, Gil Scott-Heron. Here he is, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Gil Scott-Heron.
The brothers and sisters in South Africa call Johannesburg, and when we say, what's the word? We'd like to have y'all help us out saying Johannesburg. Let's go.
So, Johannesburg, when Gil and I went to Lincoln University, there were two students in the school who were both South African. One of them was a black South African named Zola, and there was another South African there named Derek, and he was a colored South African. And their perspectives of South Africa were in many ways the same, in most ways the same. but because they were treated differently and regarded differently in terms of social status, they did have slightly different perspectives. But the good news was that they were united. They both felt that things needed to be changed. Neither one of them were comfortable enough to think that things should remain the same. But it was through them that we began to learn some of the what was going on in South Africa that we didn't hear on the news until way later. But we had a perspective on it that really woke us up. And at one point, Zola, the Black South African, showed us pictures of some of the folks, maybe some of his relatives and other folks in South Africa, other Black South Africans there, and I couldn't. It hit me really hard because I realized that a lot of those people look like some of my relatives, and that kind of struck me that struck me hard. It became more personal, and maybe this was one of the first times that I realized how connected we are in life and on this planet. But it definitely hit home in a very personal way. And Gil and I both actually could recognize people that looked like cousins, and that sort of thing. And it's something that remained with us. And at some point we had written a song about it and recorded it. And that was the song, Johannesburg.
They tell me that our brothers are over there hard to find a man. And we don't know for sure because the news we get is unreliable, man. And yes, I hate it when the start blowing, but I'm glad to see your resistance go ahead. Somebody tell me what's the word. Tell me, brother, have you heard from Johannesburg? A lot of people talking ain't saying what I want to hear. What's the word now? Sister woman, have you heard about Johannesburg? Help me out here.
A funny story about that was in 1998, when Gil and I had reunited for a brief tour, we were invited to South Africa and to play in Johannesburg. And so, I'm thinking this is a great moment. This is the moment that we're all going to reunite. This was after apartheid and Nelson Mandela had been elected president, and we thought this would be a triumphant moment for us to sing this song, and we did sing it. And when there's a part in the song that says, "What's the word?" and the response, it's call and response, and the response is Johannesburg. So when we get to that section, Gil says, "What's the word?" And I'm thinking, I'm almost, tears are almost welling up in my eyes, thinking about this resounding response that's going to come. And I could barely see out in the audience, but what I could see was just like a lot of confusion. People were like, well, what is the word? And a few people said, had the right response, but most of the people in the audience were just kind of looking at each other like, well, what are we supposed to say? He didn't tell us. And after the show, I spoke to one of the people who was involved in it, and I said, what happened? Did you guys not like that song, or what happened? I mean, it seemed like it fell flat at that point. And he said, well, the thing you have to realize is that when this song came out, it was banned here. So unless you were really like one of those people who was willing to put your life on the line, like to get this kind of music, you wouldn't have heard it.
Amazing. Going back to Pieces of a Man in 1971, that album came out the same year as What's Going On by Marvin Gaye, another very socially conscious album. But if I understand it right, you actually recorded that before What's Going On came out. So so I'm just curious about how that set off your journey to recording music and to raising consciousness. And did you feel a part of a of a culture of increased consciousness in music back then?
Oh yeah, I mean, it was already starting to happen. Stevie Wonder had already put out "Where I'm Coming From." Where he definitely voiced some anti-Vietnam War sentiments. Um, the Last Poets had already done their album. Amiri Baraka had already done an album. There were a lot of things that were going on in the 70s. I mean, the Panthers were strong. Um, the Angela Davis and George Jackson and so many things that had already transpired, and it was something that um, we felt a part of just by being who we were and being where we were, that being in New York City, um, and going to a black university. All of those things kind of came together and definitely, I believe, shaped the what we ultimately wanted to do and wanted to be about as writers.
And you mentioned attending Lincoln University with Gil Scott-Heron. Can you talk about meeting him and how your musical partnership was formed there?
Oh well, it came about as a result of both of us spending a lot of time in the music rooms. They used to have little practice rooms there with little spinet pianos inside, and this is where I would spend a lot of time composing and practicing. Um, and apparently Gil was doing the same thing, although neither one of us knew each other. But one day I was playing and I got someone knocked on the door, and it turned out to be a gentleman by the name of Victor Brown. He was a senior, and he said, "Hey, I'm doing a talent show here at Lincoln, and there's this song that I want to do. It's called God Bless the Child. Do you know it?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I do know it." And I started to play the I kind of picked out the version that I thought he was talking about, which was the Billie Holiday version. But in fact, he stopped me and he said, "But do you know the Blood, Sweat, and Tears version?" And I was like overjoyed because that was actually the version that I knew the best. And so I started to play it, and he said, "This is great. This is really great. Can you do this for me on the talent show?" And I said, "Yeah, sure, no problem." And I said, "You're just doing one song?" He says, "No, I'm doing another song. I'm doing an original by this guy, this friend of mine, um, who is in the next room." And I said, "Well, can I hear it? Maybe I could play that one too." He says, "Well, no, he's going to play it, but no, I'll introduce you anyway." So he goes away for a minute and he comes back, and here comes this long, lanky guy with this huge afro, and there's not much to say, surprisingly. And he just kind of mumbles like, "I am Gil," and he sits down and he plays the piano. And the song that he played was one that actually hadn't been originally released, but I think it's now one of the bonus tracks on the re-release of Free Will, which was the second album that Gil and I recorded together for Flying Dutchman. Um, it's called Peace. And what impressed me more than anything was the depth of the lyrics, the maturity of the lyrics, and I just it was a beautiful song. It had a lot of colors in it, and it had a lot of emotion, and for a guy who was, I had to check, I asked him, like, "How are you?" He was like maybe 19, I think, at the time. And it was just amazing to me that that someone this young could have this much insight into into life, and we became close friends after that. I immediately after hearing Peace, I played one of the songs I've been working on, and I said, "Hey, man, you think you could do something with this?" And he asked me, I played it for him, and he asked me something that kind of became our MO from that point on. He said, "Well, what were you feeling or thinking about, or what would you like to convey with this song?" And, that's something that I always felt that the music should should be able to convey without me having to say so. But if I was going to have somebody write lyrics, it made perfect sense that that he know that we were on the same page, even if he did feel those things. So we always had a conversation about what the song would mean before he began to write. But once I told him, and basically what I told him was that I said, well, this is kind of like a song I wrote for the ancestors. It's kind of a song that I wrote that pays tribute to the people who came before us, who struggled on our behalf. And he asked me to play it a couple more times, meanwhile writing in his notebook, his little orange notebook that he always wrote lyrics and poems in pen. Which kind of cheeky if you think about it, but he certainly didn't make many erasures and didn't have to. So that song ended up being called "A Toast to the People," and we recorded it on our first Arista album called "First Minute of a New Day," Midnight Band.
I'm curious how Arista, after you signed to them, dealt with you guys, because you're not just a politically conscious band. Sonically, you're really pushing boundaries, and you're bringing a lot of jazz into your music. It's hard to categorize the music that you and Gil Scott-Heron did. It's not just soul. It's not just R&B. There's all sorts of influences, and jazz. I mean, you're a jazz musician. So how did the label deal with the kind of musical direction that you were pushing the band in?
Excuse me. I'm glad you said that. I'm glad you asked me that, because I've always felt that Clive Davis who was the head of Arista, the founder of Arista, got really excited by the fact that the bottle, which was on our previous album, Winter in America, the one before we signed with Arista, before Gil signed with Arista.
That black boy over there running scared, his old man in a bottle. Say he done quit his 9 to 5, he drink full time, now he's hanging in a bottle. You see that black boy over there running scared, his old man got a problem, and it's a bad one, cause he done putting off damn near everything. His old woman wears a ring for a bottle.
I think that he felt that could be a fantastic direction, and one that would pay dividends down the road. But that was a one-off. The bottle, it was interesting, and it was fun to do. And there were going to be others like that, but it wasn't our main focus at that time. But I think that Clive always felt that if he could get just one more bottle out of us, that he could make it, and that he could make things pop. But we were resistant to that, because we wanted to do what we wanted to do. We weren't banking on any formulas, or even thinking about doing things that we had done before. We were interested in progressing and moving forward musically, and conceptually. So that definitely rubbed Clive the wrong way. And I also believe that, Clive recognized that Gil was more of a blues singer, a bluesologist, as he called himself. And that if he could just separate him from these other notions he had, that mainly the things that I brought to the table, that that he would actually probably be able to propel Gil into another atmosphere of celebrity.
And Gil obviously didn't want that.
No, Gil didn't want that. I mean, Gil was very happy to continue doing what we were doing, and so we were both pretty unified as far as that was concerned. As far as what we were doing artistically, we didn't want Clive or anybody else to dictate to us what we were going to do. So every time we would present an album to Clive, we would sit in his office, and he'd sit sit listening very pensively. And at the end of it, he would say, well, that's really good stuff. It's really good music. I really like it, but I don't hear a hit. And we would always laugh because, we knew that was coming. But in ourselves, we felt that maybe if he had known the community that we were a part of and more or less addressing, that it could be a hit, but not within the standard confines of what he as a record company exec in the 70s thought could be a hit, and we felt that a lot of the things could have been done maybe a bit differently in terms of marketing and who it was marketed to, etc. But it is what it is, in the words of a famous American dictator.
So you had the album Winter in America, but the song Winter in America didn't appear until the next album, the follow-up album, if I have that right. Can you talk about that song? It's a personal favorite of mine.
Oh, I'm glad. Well, I still perform it, in fact, and I always say that people will come up to me from time to time and say, "Wow, it's amazing, you guys. How did you know? You guys are prophetic. It's 50 years ago, and you knew what was going to happen." And I always say, no, that's not actually what it was. We were talking about what was happening then, and there's no way in hell that this should still be relevant. And it really it kind of really angers me that it is so relevant. It's very sad. It's very sad, in my opinion.
From the Indians, welcome to pilgrims, and to the buffalo that once ruled the plain. Like the vultures, they're circling beneath the dark clouds, looking for the rain. Yes, they've been looking for the rain. Just like the city, the stagger on the coastline, living in a nation that just can't take much more. Like the forest they buried beneath the highway, never had a chance to grow old. Well, they never had a chance to grow old. And now it's a winter. It seems like winter in America. It's a time when all of the healers done been killed and been betrayed. Yeah, even though it's something wrong, everybody ought to know winter. Winter in America. The truth is there ain't nobody fighting because, well, nobody knows what to say. Brother say so. Winter in America. The Constitution was a noble piece of paper, and with free society, well, they struggle but they died in vain.
Fast forwarding a couple albums to another favorite of mine, 95 South, All the Places I've Been. I've read that that's a tribute to the activist Fannie Lou Hamer.
That is correct. Fannie Lou Hamer was one of the people who was responsible for much of the protests, and again, still relevant in terms of voting rights today.
And people who sacrifice their lives and work all through their lives to do something for us are at least worth a song and a thought every now and then. So for Sister Fannie Lou Hamer, the song is called 95 South, All of the Places We've Been. I've been in towns where there was no freedom or a future around. So I've been in places where you could not eat or take a drink of water wherever you please. And now that I meet you in the middle of a mountain, well, I'm reaching all out from within. But all I can think of are the chapters and scenes of all of the places we've been. Now, I'm not such an old man, so don't get me wrong. I'm the latest survivor of the constantly strong. I've been to Mississippi and down the city streets. I've seen days of plenty and nights with nothing to eat. But I'm not too happy about the middle of a mountain, so soon I'll be climbing again. Yes, and all I can think of are the chapters and scenes of all of the places we've been. A lot of places indeed.
And the allusion to 95 South is that we spent a lot of time on that road. It's a road that goes all the way from, I think, from below even the borders of Florida, all the way up to New England. And it's something that we, a lot of our experiences were based along that road. Let's put it that way. From New York to Pennsylvania, Lincoln University, and Philly, to Baltimore, where we spent some time. Gil picked up his master's degree there. To Washington D.C., to Virginia, where we also spent some time. And it's just one of the things that one of the memories that we have about our time working together.
And one more song I want to ask you about, because I love the groove of the song so much. Willing, off of the album 1980.
Yeah. Again, that was a song that we were doing in the 80s. Well, it wasn't exactly the 80s, but it was kind of the late 70s. And just like anyone who listens to music, we were affected by some of the things that were going on. And I was a big fan. Actually, I was a huge fan of Nile Rodgers and some of the grooves that he had laid down with Chic. And it just occurred to me that I had wanted to try something like that, and that song kind of lent itself to that kind of treatment. And so I experimented musically with it, but of course, the message was still the same, or the content was still relevant, and it wasn't. In other words, what I'm trying to say is that the music was what it was because our goal was to attract people, to make people listen to more deeply to the lyrics, and so we incorporated as many different elements as we felt comfortable with, to kind of draw people in to listen to the music. And Willing was a song that I felt demanded, a bit of attention.
We've all heard so many conflicting words about life, whether wrong or right, or how you gotta be working hard, and it ain't no easy job to survive. Just keep it alive. ourselves as links in a chain, with so much to gain. We are the ones that tie our fathers to our sons, don't you know? That's how we grow. My life really means is that the songs that I sing are just pieces of a dream that I've been building. And we can make a stand, and here I'm reaching out my hand, 'cause I know damn well we can if we are willing. But we gotta be willing. Got to be willing. Got to be willing. Got to be willing.
The whole concept of it is that you can be for a lot of things. You can be for voting rights. You can be for Black Lives Matter. You can be for a lot of things. You can be for change. We all say that we want things to change, but at the end of the day, what are you willing to do, and what are you willing to sacrifice? What are you willing to give up? And the operative word there is willing. And that's basically what the song says, that we can make a stand. I'm reaching out to you. I'm reaching out my hand. And that we can if you are willing, but you have to be willing. And, that's really the key. I mean, we all talk, but where's the commitment that goes along with that?
I play that song to motivate myself, whether it's politically or just personally, and it's really it's really effective for me. So thank you for making that song on top of your entire catalog. So 1980 is your last album with Gil Scott-Heron. How did your partnership come to an end?
Well, it's still a bit kind of confusing, to me. I would say that it basically happened as a result of misunderstanding. One of the things that happened with me musically was that I continued to grow, and I was writing. I probably was writing more than I could have possibly put into the albums that Gil and I were doing, and so was Gil. Gil was also writing a lot more music on his own, and I had thought of the idea of possibly doing a solo project. At the same time, we were kind of we had been on the road for several years, and I needed a break. I definitely was really sick of the road. And I thought, well, this would be maybe a good time. We had a little break, and I thought maybe this would be a good time for us to take a break. I was surprised, though, that Gil was more resistant to it than I had expected. But I finally convinced him, let's take a 3 to 6 month break, because we had been on the road so much that neither of us had written any songs. We didn't have access to a piano or anything else, so we hadn't written any songs either separately or together, and it seemed like this would have been a good time to kind of gather up our energies and our resources and kind of get back on track. But like I said, to my dismay, Gil didn't seem particularly ready to do that. In fact, he kind of panicked when I told him about it, and but I convinced him that I needed this for my mental health, and so I went up to California. I went to Oakland to visit the woman that I was seeing at the time, and within a couple of months, I heard from a friend of mine down in L.A. who had said that he would see me when I was played at the Roxy, but nobody had told me about a gig at the Roxy in Los Angeles. And so, that was the way I found out about it. And obviously I wasn't, my name wasn't on the bill, and I hadn't been invited. So that was one of the things. That was more like the end of it. But I just think that one conversation that I had, with Gil prior to that was that um, the music he felt was kind of moving away, and like I said, I felt that I was growing musically, and maybe it got to the point where he didn't feel comfortable, with the kind of music that we were doing anymore, and that really upset me. I mean, I felt like, well, I'm really not doing my job, because my only purpose was to provide. Um, my goal was to provide Gil with the background that he needed to get his message across. And if he felt that wasn't happening, then I felt like I had been failing, and so I took a step back as the music director. And again, he also misinterpreted that, and just one thing kind of led to the other, and I think there were a couple of other people whispering in his ear, um, saying that I'm taking the wrong path. I'm going the wrong way with him, and that I'm costing him money or whatever it is, that people at the record company were telling him, and what have you. So yeah, it kind of broke up, I think, under those circumstances, and yeah, it was sad, and I'm sure in retrospect now, I'm sure that drugs probably had a part to do with that also.
So it's well known that in the last decades of his life, Gil Scott-Heron had a really serious addiction problem. I'm wondering, going back to songs early in your run together, "The Bottle," which we talked about, "Home Is Where the Hatred Is," those are songs about addiction. Was Gil writing at that point then from personal experience?
No, not at all. Not as far as I know. And we hung out all the time. So no, I mean, did he have any experience with heroin? No. Did he have any experience with angel dust? Well, we tried it a couple of times, and that's why we wrote that song, because it was kind of a warning. If we got out more or less unscathed, but we had a lot of friends who didn't, and including one of them, a suicide. Um, and so we knew this was bad stuff, and we weren't really trying to have that, And then the bottle, a song about addiction to alcohol. Well, we had seen that firsthand in our lives, and all around us. I mean, alcohol is a serious disease, and it affects a lot of people in this country and in the world. Um, so yeah, but none of those things that actually hit home personally. Um, at that time. And this is why I said before, Jill was able to bring a kind of a maturity and a kind of experience to some of the songs that he wrote without actually having had those experiences, without having actually lived those lives.
And so, when did it become clear to you that he was dealing with serious addiction issues?
Well, I don't think it really ever occurred to me until, a couple of friends of mine told me, I saw Gil on the A train in New York. Um, and he looked pretty bad. He looked like he was on drugs. He looked like he was on heroin. He looked, he was disheveled and, you know, uh, looking confused and this. And I still didn't believe it, because to me that was all just hearsay. But in '94, Gil invited me to sub for his pianist at the time, because she hadn't been able to make it, and so um, I did, and it was at SOBs in New York. Um, and he didn't make the sound check, so I didn't see him there. But and he didn't actually make the beginning of the show either. But when he finally did appear, we were in the midst of playing a song, and one of the members of the band said, "He's here now. He's coming." And I looked over, and I didn't see anybody, you know. And then he stepped up on the stage, and when I finally saw him, I was in shock. I mean, here's a guy who's 3 years older than me, and he looked like my grandfather, and it was just, to this day, I remember the feeling that my heart just kind of sank into my stomach, um, because at that particular moment I realized that all of the things that people had told me, well, most of the things that people had told me, were true.
When's the last time you spoke?
The last time we spoke was 2007. I had an interesting conversation with a mutual friend of Gil's and mine, and I had told him the difficulty, how painful it was to deal with Gil, and I had really tried to make some overtures to him, but we had some other business issues that were really pressing that needed to be discussed, and you know, he never seemed to be willing to talk about that. And a lot of our conversations were about people who had wronged him, and him being the victim of these people who, basically they were relatives and friends, good friends of his who I knew that would have never tried to hurt him. And, you know, um, I actually became one of those people at some point in his mind. And trying to keep the lines of communication open for those reasons. Um, but I had a conversation with with a mutual friend of ours, as I said, and I told him, how difficult it was and painful it was to maintain this relationship with him. And I'll never forget what he told me. He said, the difference um, between a dead friend and a friend who is an addict. And I said, no, what is it? And he said, well, your dead friend, they're dead. They're in the ground. You have to move on. You have no choice. He says, with a friend who is an addict, they're dead, but you're carrying them around on your back. And I thought about that, and I said, I have to say goodbye to my dead friend. And I went to a show that he was doing at SOB's again, and I went down after in between sets, and I said to him, he said, why don't you sit in, and I said, it's okay. I think I'm going to leave, but I just wanted to say to you that I love you and goodbye. And that was like 2007. And yeah, he passed away in 2011. I hadn't seen him since then.
Did you go to his funeral at the Riverside Church?
No. And the people asked me why. It would have been extremely difficult. And I'm really glad that I didn't go, based on what some people had told me was happening there. I think kind of turned into maybe a bit of a circus. I think Kanye showed up and performed. So I'm glad I didn't go, but I explained to people at the time that I had already said goodbye, and which is the truth. And I didn't feel like I wanted to say goodbye again. I didn't feel that I needed to say goodbye again, because the goodbye that I said, was was based on, well, what I explained to you before.
I was there, and I can confirm that Kanye West performed, and he performed a song that samples you guys, one of many samples of your work. What has that been like for you, being so influential for the generation that came after you, after your run with Gil Scott-Heron, the hip hop generation?
Oh, it's amazing. It's humbling. It's exciting. And ultimately, I think that you never know the impact that you will have on anyone, and the fact that the work that we have done has impacted multiple generations is just something. It's unfathomable. You can't even conceive that you're going to affect the person sitting next to you. But for this music to still have a life and to still mean something to people. I mean, there's really no way to get my head around it, but I am thankful.
And so your new album, Out on Jazz is Dead, you did that in collaboration with Adrian Young and Ali Shaheed Muhammad.
There is something that I call the tradition. All right. And the tradition started in my mind with the griot. the African tradition of maintaining the very essence of African culture. Of course, when we were scattered to the winds in the African diaspora, that job title kind of disappeared, and it was up to us to take on the responsibility of maintaining that culture.
Ah, it feels hot though.
Yeah, that shit, man. That's a crazy track, man. I love it. This is the role that Gil and I saw ourselves in. And in as such, we were able to identify others who we could see were on that same path. Working with Adrian and working with Ali, I was able to see that same dedication and that same sense of purpose, that keeping of the tradition.
This, I believe, is your first album as a band leader in 20 years. And you play a lot of different instruments on this. Talk to us about how this album came about and how you created it.
So I had been contacted by some of Adrian and Ali, one of Adrian and Ali's representatives, about doing a show at the Highland Lodge in Los Angeles, and I was all about it. I was very happy because I hadn't been to Los Angeles, but there was another component, and that was that they were trying to reach out to some older musicians to see if they might be interested in doing some recording with them. And just so happened that I was the first one that they had been able to get to do that. And I don't think any of us knew. And as they tell me, they really didn't know what direction anything was going to go into. It was just something that they were doing as an experiment and see how it worked out. So I did the show, and then we went into the studio, and they had started on some ideas, some basic ideas. And when I came in, I don't know, it just kind of clicked with me, what they were doing. I didn't, I had no concept really, and neither did they. And this is the thing that I think was really the pivotal or the pivotal point for all of us, that we just allowed the music to tell us what it wanted to do, and we listened, we served it. So I was listening to one of these ideas, and I saw in the distance, I saw a case that looked very familiar to me. It was an alto flute, and I said, "Hey man, can I play this?" And Adrian said, "Of course." So I put the thing together, and I started doing a couple of little motifs and lines on it, and within 5 minutes, we just all looked at each other and said, "Hey, hey, is the mic set up? Let's go." And pretty much it was like that. Whatever was being done, it was completely natural. There was no, reaching for the mini moog. I ended up playing mini moog on the album. I ended up playing Fender Rhodes on the album. I ended up playing alto flute and C flute on the album, and probably would have done a lot more, but it was just it was fantastic. Adrian's studio is state of the art. It's really a beautiful place to work, and it just, the three of us kind of didn't even really have to talk. We actually didn't really talk that much. We talked a lot after, but while we were recording, it was just it just flowed very, very easily. I was really shocked, and I think we all were pleasantly surprised at how smoothly it went.
Since you mentioned it, can I ask you what the Fender Rhodes has meant to your sound, to your repertoire over these many decades of being a musician?
Well, I've come to actually be associated with the Fender Rhodes, which is something I'm very happy about because I love the Fender Rhodes. I There are so many things that I feel would not have been the same if there were not a Fender Rhodes. Songs like "Peace Go With You, Brother," songs like "The Bottle."
Pawned off damn near everything, his old woman's wedding ring for a bottle. Here goes. Don't you think it's a crime? How time after time.
All of the albums on the current album JID 008. I mean, there are so many songs where the Fender Rhodes adds an element that absolutely no other instrument could. And for this reason, I mean, it expresses something that's deep inside of my soul and something that's inside of my spirit that, we have a connection. We have a connection and it works. So yeah, I'm very happy for that instrument.
And you have a side project that you've done, which is a podcast named after your first album with Gil Scott-Heron, Pieces of a Man. It's a series of conversations between you and a death row prisoner named Keith Lamar. How did that come about, and what are you trying to do with that podcast?
During the virus and the confinement, my wife was just browsing articles about what the confinement means to different people and how they were able to survive it. And she ran across an article in Mother Jones by Keith, which I thought was incredibly generous for a man who had been in solitary confinement at that time for 27 years, now 28. For him to be able to, for him to want to share his ideas and the ways that he's come up with to deal with confinement with people who had only been in confinement for like a few months. I thought that was incredibly generous, and he's a great writer also. And she became interested though after his article in his situation, which he describes eloquently in his book Condemned, which I recommend that everyone read. And once she read it, she was she read it in about 24 hours, and she handed the book to me and said, "You have to read this now." And I put it off for a little while. I must admit, I put it off for a couple of weeks, but when I got into it, it was the same. I spent the next 24 hours reading the book, and when I finished, I put it down and I said, "We have to do something." Now, I'm not anywhere near an influencer on Instagram or anything of the sort, but I do have a few people who follow me, and I like to think that many of the people that I connect with on social media are people who have some of the same concerns as I do, and I thought if I were able to expand the consciousness about Keith and about his situation, that I thought maybe I would, maybe some people would become interested, and maybe even people with a higher profile might also take interest. Briefly, Keith, as a teenager, a poor teenager in Cleveland, Ohio, took to selling drugs as a way to survive, and he began getting threats from other people who were involved in the drug dealing in Cleveland, to the point that he felt that he probably would need some protection. He bought himself a gun, and not too long after that, he was ambushed by two people, and one of whom had a gun and shot him twice in his leg, and Keith was able to fire off a couple of shots at this person as well. In the hospital, both at the hospital. Keith survived, but the other person died. He was 19, and he was sentenced to to, I think it was 18, minimum 18 years or something like that, in prison, which he actually had no problem with. He knew that he had killed this person, and he was prepared to pay. He didn't try to cop a plea deal or anything like that. He said, I killed this person. He believed in the justice system, and he did his time. But after 2 years, the place that he was in, which was called Lucasville State Prison, there was a riot. There was a well-known riot that occurred there, and it was based on the refusal of some of the inmates to take to some type of uh, an injection, some type of a vaccine or something. I'm not exactly sure. I don't remember, but they were opposed to it because of some of the ingredients, which in their religion they were not allowed to take, and they were going to be forced to take it, and an uprising occurred, kind of based around that, and Keith was out in the yard when it all happened, and seeing that everything was getting trashed, he ran back into to save his belongings, his personal property, because he during that time there were going to be people going into cells and stealing people's things and destroying them as well. So he ran back in, and long story short, because he was considered among the suspects of people who had killed, as it turns out, 11 people, one of whom was a guard, a prison guard. And there were quite I would say between, I think it was about 5 inmates who were charged with these murders, Keith being one of them. And all of them, except for Keith, copped a plea deal. In exchange for preferential treatment, several of them were moved to other lower security prisons, reduced time, this kind of thing. And Keith was the only one who said, "Look, I didn't do it. There's no way I'm going to confess to, because when you cop a plea deal, you have to say you did it." And he was not willing to say that he did it because he didn't, and not really understanding at 22 or 23 how the justice system works. He was penalized for that. What? Because he was going to have to be taken to trial. He was going to have to, tax the justice system, if you will, and actually have a trial, which he expected would prove his innocence. Only one problem is that the prosecution withheld the testimony of a lot of the other inmates, the other witnesses. The evidence, over 22,000 pieces of evidence, were all trampled on and contaminated by the state police who came in to break up the riot. And so, without the testimony and without the evidence, the physical evidence, he was convicted. He was convicted for the death of several of those people, not the guard. But the confessions and the testimony of the witnesses would have been enough to exonerate him. However, they were never allowed in the court by the prosecution. After that, after pleading, for an appeal, after doing several appeals, his legal remedies have all been exhausted. He was sentenced to death, and that is coming up. That is supposed to come up on November 16th, 2023. So actually, he's got 2 years to try and get it. And I think that's probably one of the things that made me feel a greater sense of urgency after having read his book and understanding exactly how he got in that position and how incredibly unfair it is that this man will be put to death. Again, I mean, there are so many cases of this. But this is one that struck me because I began to have a relationship with him. I started to speak with him on a regular basis. And we started, we have a lot in common. We have a lot of, we laugh a lot, we talk a lot, and he's a very wise man. He's done a lot of reading. And we have great conversations. And it just occurred to me at one point, as I was beginning to put together the idea for a podcast, that I would have him as a guest on my show. Well, we did that, and it was so successful and so riveting and gratifying for me emotionally, and I think other people kind of felt the same way. That I thought, look, why just have him as a guest? He might as well be a co-host. We might as well do this together, and that was the seed, and that was the beginning of Pieces of a Man, the podcast.
And if people want to learn more about Keith Lamar's case, they can go to keithlamar.org, and we'll include a link to that. Brian, we're going to wrap. I've kept you way over time. So I just want to ask you, any words you want to leave us with as we close this out?
Oh, wow. That's heavy.
How people can follow you, how people can follow your work.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
Or anything else.
I'm getting ready to go down that road, man.
No, or anything you want to tell us. I just want to.
Yeah. So, thank you. I want to thank everybody who, has supported me in this journey, this 50-year journey from Pieces of a Man to JID 008. You can follow me on Instagram at Brian Jackson _, that's 2 underscores, Jackson, Brian __ Jackson. Same on Twitter. On Facebook, it's the official Brian Jackson, and my website is brianjackson.net. I guess that's it. Thank you very much, Aaron. I really appreciate you having me on this show.
Brian Jackson, it's a real honor to speak to you. Multi-instrumentalist, partner with Gil Scott-Heron in a legendary series of albums in the 1970s. His latest album is out now on Jazz Is Dead. Brian Jackson, thanks so much.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Take care.